Hello, happy June, and happy Father's Day to all of you men who have helped raise children. It's a piece of work, isn't it? This is the look-see for mid-June 2025, and it's warm and wonderful here in West Michigan, finally. And I hope it's the same where you are. As this is posted, I will be in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, speaking at the June 14th Transition Talks about building a planetary civilization. And I really had to push to get this done. So when I asked for a keyword for the month, I heard the word lavender. There are lots of ways to interpret this word. It's a plant, a flower, an herb, a color, and it comes from the Latin word lavare, which means to wash. I went to a Catholic high school where I had 4 years of Latin, and I think somewhere back in those ancient days, I read something that said the Dutch people used to strew lavender on clean floors to add a pleasant smell to the house and keep themselves calm. I'm not sure I remember that exactly correctly, but lavender is a healer and a calmer. It's also a perennial plant, a delightfully delicate flower, and the color lavender is a symbol of newly awakened spirituality. So the message from lavender might be multi-level in telling us that something is being washed or cleansed, and we would do well to stay calm and let the cleaning proceed. The fact that it's a perennial would suggest that we are all survivors. And after a long, cold, tough period, we will rise again. Finally, it hints that a new spirituality is awakening across a broad spectrum of the world, something wonderful to behold. So let's begin. Number 1. I have always thought of the deep state as a combination of corrupt politicians, CEOs of international corporations working in collusion, government institutions, a dozen or so super elite families, the Vatican, and the Rothschild banks. In doing the look-see, I often sit down with a stack of blank paper and begin asking questions. Sometimes a scene will come to me, and I draw what I see. In doing so this month, one of the questions I asked was, how is the deep state doing? Immediately, I saw an unusual scene of what I thought was some heavy fabric, maybe burlap, with edges that were rapidly unraveling. As it unraveled, it created a lot of chaff and debris that was churning almost 30 feet in the air, clouding the atmosphere greatly. A bank was sitting in the midst of the unraveling fabric, and it had no doors, only windows, and the windows were barred. For some reason, the fabric reminded me of a graveyard next to an old church that I once visited in England, Woodstock, England. Other impressions that came to me were all stops pulled, civil wars, no limits, and no longer caring who sees, knows, or gets hurt. I came away with the idea that the deep state is really just a banking cartel. It looked like they were actually withdrawing as their plans and structures continued to unravel, malfunction, and collapse. I had the feeling they would make a last-ditch effort to create World War III, and if they succeed in making that occur, it will take them out as well. Number 2. Jobs continued to be lost for a while, making people nervous and causing some great difficulty. I don't really see this as jobs being lost as much as I see it as a new paradigm coming in. Try not to panic if you were suddenly bumped from your job. Instead, keep your eyes on the future and the kind of work that's needed to bring that future into being. We have lots of transition structures to go through over the next 5 to 10 years. And whether you have a job or not, there's always a lot of work that's needed to keep life as smooth as possible. When I talk about work, I'm talking about things like doing the laundry, cleaning the bathroom, mowing and trimming the yard, repairing the roof, or cleaning the gutters, and things of that sort. Just try skipping the laundry for a few weeks and see how smooth life isn't. Same with doing the dishes. If you recently lost a job, keep yourself busy by doing the necessary work that promotes smoother days and quieter nights. And do some of the things you didn't have time to do before the job loss. When the dishes are done, look online or talk to family and friends about what kind of job you're looking for next. And don't hesitate to start your own business or even your own hodgepodge. A hodgepodge is something we do in our family. When I was raising my children, I emphasized that they needed to think about 3 or 4 very different skill sets that they were good at. For them to develop that, the skills had to be something that they liked doing. Otherwise, work becomes drudgery. For example, one of my daughters is a registered nurse. She has a master's in business administration, is a highly skilled cook for large groups. She's an excellent seamstress and can make almost anything in the way of clothing, has a small multi-needle embroidery business, is a winemaker, and also makes soaps and lotions. My son is a respiratory therapist, a very good mechanic, a heavy equipment operator, an excellent roofer and part-time carpenter, and has a small business growing microgreens, organic vegetables, and pasture-raised chicken. The idea was that if one job came to an end, they would have other skills and therefore many more options for being able to find another job. If one job area wasn't working, another one would. So I keep hoping that the millennials and those in Generation Z, will discover that their best option for the future is to develop a hodgepodge of skills and start their own business. Nothing is more fun. And it's the best way to avoid becoming a cog in the machine, as well as never get fired. Number 3, the U.S. Department of Education is in turmoil as some of the decision-making around schools is returning to individual states. I've mentioned this before, but this month I saw an interesting development in the way some people have chosen to live in a specific neighborhood so that their children will be able to go to a specific school. Over the coming years, people will begin to move to a specific state because of the way it is handling their schools. Missouri, Arkansas, Indiana, Tennessee, Iowa, and Oklahoma are getting a lot of scrutiny and will be very good places to live in the future. Number 4, I saw Zelensky being removed from the world stage and a Ukrainian general stepping into the role, but the general is much less of a puppet for the deep state and much more sympathetic to the people of Ukraine. The general will also be tired of war, fighting, and death. Peace talks begin even if the rest of the world is blowing up, or at least trying to continue blowing smoke. Number 5, the U.S. is going to have a Cuba moment in which we are isolated and cut off from the rest of the world. Might there be a little bit of karma happening here? Number 6. Question: do we want to be a country with such high wages? This question came up several different times. I kept brushing it aside, but I had the impression finally that we were supposed to think about this in terms of simplifying life, not becoming peasants. We are very close to the scenario detailed in the John Teeter conversations. And last month, I saw a world leader being killed that changed everything, leaving us very vulnerable to all-out crazy war. And all of that changes how we interact, our wage structures, our business, everything. Number 7, as the globalists and their plans for a one world government disintegrate, we will see a frenzy of disorganized projects being pushed by everyone trying to get a foot in the new order and set of business structures, whatever they may be. Everybody is getting excited about having something new they want to contribute, and a new structure that might fit into. So, number 8. Here are a few of the headlines I've seen lately. Dutch government collapses. Masses of Ukrainian soldiers surrender. Ukraine bombs Russia without Trump's sign-off. Sanctuary cities defunded. The Bank of International Settlements orders gold to be returned. Housing market about to explode. Paris in flames. Xi Jinping has disappeared. Yellowstone is rumbling. Mount Etna erupts suddenly. Lindsey Graham spends $800,000 on a trip to Ukraine. For what? Obama found in the P. Diddy files. Solar storm incoming. 10 states on the brink of collapse. Who used Biden's auto pen? Trump calls for arrest of Gavin Newsom. The Soros swamp. Investigation into Crossfire Hurricane opens again. Pure chaos in China. Who's funding the anti-ICE protests in California? Silver is no longer safe. And secret Nazi empire. And on and on. Almost none of these were good or inspiring headlines. If you're seeing these kinds of headlines every day, be sure to make a conscious effort to listen to something good, something uplifting, and maybe a little bit comforting. Also, tell yourself to stop getting caught up in the sideshows of life, because those are all sideshows, and pay attention to the direction we are going in. Number 9, 129 million children worldwide and 366 million adults worldwide have ADHD. That is 495 million people, almost 500 million worldwide, who have been told that they are unfocused, disorganized, disruptive, too impulsive to fit in with normal society, and they should take expensive drugs to help them. However, the drugs are not the only cost. Research shows that the societal cost is $122.8 billion per year, which comes out to $14,092 per adult. This breaks down into $66.8 billion in unemployment costs, $28.8 billion in productivity loss, and $14.3 billion in healthcare services. Wow. Between 2012 and 2021, the demand and prescriptions for ADHD increased by 45.5%. That's huge. Today, 62% of U.S. children receive medication for ADHD, and 56% of adults with ADHD also have anxiety disorder. Anxiety is defined as persistent worry, stress, apprehension, uneasiness, fear about everyday situations, tensions, or seeing the world as a threat. In my view, given all those headlines that we just looked at, anxiety is a very appropriate response to the world we are seeing around us. Are we being drugged into silence? Are we being labeled as disorganized and unable to focus because we keep focusing on the truth of our situation? And the powers that want to be just want us to keep their system going? What if our daily life was not anxiety provoking? Can you even begin to imagine a different way of living? What if we went to bed at night and slept well for as long as we needed? What if we awakened quietly and stayed in bed for half an hour, listening to the birds or the wind, thinking about life for the coming day? What if we got up, dressed, and went out to feed chickens, collect eggs, dig up a few potatoes, then picked strawberries, lettuce, peas, and zucchini? We might then come in, fix breakfast by scrambling the eggs we just gathered, clean the strawberries, and set the potatoes, the berries, and the zucchini aside for dinner. After breakfast, we might clean up the kitchen, do laundry, go back outside to mow grass or tend the garden for an hour or two, and then sit in the shade with a glass of lemonade or kombucha for a moment that refreshes us. Maybe we would continue to work on a project we were doing to make some cash, or something routine that could only be done in whatever season we were in. That might be painting a house, or trimming trees around the property, making bread, rebuilding a piece of equipment, maybe making a dress or jacket, writing a book, cleaning the basement, or even making strawberry jam. Dinner would be in late afternoon and consist of potatoes, peas, zucchini, and strawberries, as well as a bit of the sausage made the previous month. After dinner, we might attend a meeting or visit a friend, and then come home, collect the rest of the eggs laid that day, close the chickens, and spend the rest of the evening reading, writing, planning the next project, listing the materials needed, and reviewing what you have on hand versus what must be done to complete the project successfully. And then bedtime would be when we became sleepy. And once again, we would fall asleep and sleep well for as long as we needed. Where is the anxiety in that lifestyle? There isn't much. The world is quiet. People and events make sense. There is a routine that is self-sufficient and rewarding. There is no rat race or debt slavery. There are no artificial deadlines or political correctness. In a case of extreme collapse of our current system, that kind of life might be what we revert to while we slowly regroup and decide what to rebuild and how to go about it. Hopefully, we won't have that kind of collapse. But just as hopefully, maybe we can reorganize our lives to have a lot less anxiety once we get past some of the current chaos. Number 10. What is happening in Ireland? Will Islamification take over there? For a long time, I followed what was happening in Ireland because some of my great-grandparents came from there. Lately, it's difficult to get anything relevant or insightful from the news wires. But when I tune in and look, I see the same kind of bullying of the Irish population by the elites and bankers running things there as what has been happening in America. The bullying includes the redefinition of hundreds of common words, forced immigration, poor financial decisions, poor decisions around corporations, housing, cars, medicine, and education. Changing the meaning of commonly understood words and adding a variety of new and meaningless words is a powerful Tower of Babel method of destroying cohesiveness in a population. The forced immigration of people who have a completely different worldview and set of religious beliefs is also a powerful way of breaking up a society. Looking at Islam from the outside and knowing a little of how it got started, it looks to me like Islam is really not a religion as much as it's a political, power-hungry agenda masquerading as religion. Religion is meant to be a pathway to establishing a working connection to the Godhead and the great love, wisdom, and power that God is. I'm sure there are many good people who embrace the Islamic religion, but the Islamic goal is to erase the infidels from the planet. And no matter how I turn this and examine it, it doesn't have anything to do with true religion. Those manipulating the immigrants know this. And they're using the immigrants to bring about chaos and a reduction in population via breakdowns in every area of life. And that includes life in Ireland. The long-term goal of the elites and bankers is to set up 3 religious zones in the world. I've talked about this before. They envision the Americas as Christian, the EU and Africa as Islamic, and the East as Buddhist or Hindu. They think this is the perfect setup for future wars that can be fomented using secretive antagonism to stir up the groups. When I look at Ireland, I'm reminded of something I read a long time ago. I have a friend. His name is Amal Toth, and he's a writer. He lives just south of me in Indiana and has written a number of books. He sent one of his early books to me for review and comment long time ago. It was called Batu. The story was good. It was fast-moving, and it was about a young woman named Batu who was living in a distant future. She was a member of a small group of people who seemed to have inherited many Islamic beliefs and a more primitive way of life in the jungle. Batu was waking up to truth, love, and speaking up about what was really going on in the community, risking her life and causing a great deal of gossip and consternation among her people. I won't say any more because I don't want to spoil the story. However, the interesting thing to me was how this story came to be written. Amal was traveling in India when he happened to lock eyes with a young Indian girl, and suddenly the entire future of the planet and this young girl burst through his consciousness. It was a deep and powerful knowing. He came home and began writing. Since that time, he has changed the name of the book and republished it under the title Love's Transformation. He then went on to write an entire series of books that continued the same theme. I often think of Ireland and Europe when I recall the story of Batu, maybe because I have often seen Ireland near the tropics in the distant future, and all of Europe is scarcely populated and Islamic in nature. Number 11. If you haven't seen the Robert Breedlove Clips video with Dr. Jack Kruse talking about the answer to the question, who is Satoshi Nakamoto? You ought to take an hour and watch it. Wow. It is truly mind-bending. In it, Kruse shares an astounding bit of history that led to the creation of Bitcoin. As he talked, I suddenly began to understand several things that made a great deal of sense in terms of why things are so crazy right now. If what Kruse is saying is true, or even partially accurate, there are several things to seriously consider. First, there are two big mafia groups operating on the planet. One is the Italian mafia, the other is the Jewish mafia. They often work together, but they also compete with each other. Within the Jewish mafia, we have two separate factions. The New York Jewish group, which was headed by Meyer Lansky for a long time, and the Chicago Jewish group, run by the Rothschilds and their various lackeys. So back in the early days of the 1900s, the Rothschilds made a deal with the English monarchy in which the Rothschilds promised to bring America into World War I because America didn't want to fight. So in return, however, if they succeeded in getting America into the war, they wanted the land belonging to Palestine as their reward. They intended to coax Jews from around the world to move to Palestine, where they would build a country called Israel. The Rothschilds needed a place from which to run their operations, which were mostly illegal drug, sex, and slave trade activities and money laundering. Once they had been given the territory of Palestine, the Rothschild Group offered to relocate Jews there, but said the Jews should give the Rothschilds their money before they traveled. You know, maybe they thought it was unsafe to travel with large sums of money. I don't know. But the Jews should give the Rothschilds their money before they traveled, and the Rothschilds would put it in safekeeping until the travelers were settled in the new land, after which they would give the money back to the settlers. So the people moved, but most never got their money back. When Meyer Lansky, a Russian Jew who had emigrated to America, found out about the deal and the Rothschilds not giving the money back, he was furious. Furious that one group of Jews would cheat another group of Jews. Lansky then used his connections. He built a computer system able to secretly track everything the Rothschilds were doing with money. This morphed into crypto money that was used on the dark web to avoid being tracked and taxed by the government. In short, Lansky not only had a computer system able to track the financial schemes of the Rothschilds, he was responsible for crypto and the evolution to Bitcoin. So fast forward to today, and what do we have at this point in time? We have a civil war going on between the New York Jewish mafia and the Rothschild Jewish mafia, with each side fighting for supremacy and control. They may each have a Donald Trump lookalike out there. Is this why Trump was not informed of the recent attack deep into Russia? Do we have 3 Trumps? One for the New York Jews, one for the Rothschild Jews, and one who's the real Trump? My God, who's really running the country? So this civil war might explain the support for Bitcoin, crypto, and Israel shown by the Trump associated with the New York Mafia. And then the contradictory statements and push for war by another Trump associated with the Rothschild Mafia. The Rothschilds like war. That's how they make their money. The New York Jews like banking. That's how they make their money. This civil war would also explain the victory photo of Trump as the Pope, because in the past, the Vatican was aligned with the Rothschild Mafia. However, if the New York Mafia took control of the Vatican Bank, they added insult to injury by putting a guy from Chicago in as the new Pope, because Chicago is the home base of the Rothschild Mafia in the US. The Vatican takeover could also have brought in the Italian Mafia, setting up a 3-way conflict pitting the New York Mafia against the Rothschild Mafia and the Italian families. If this were the case, it could stir resentment going back centuries because of some history that is not widely known. Thousands of years ago, many Iranians migrated to Italy and became known as the Italians. Italian DNA shows them to be actually Iranian. So in a nutshell, the historical resentment begins with the Khazars, or Khazarians, also known as the early Jews, invading Canaan, which was part of the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire, which we know today as Iran, and the Jewish invasion resulted in some bad blood between the Jews and the Iranians. And we still see that today with Israel regularly threatening to blow up Iran. The Italian families have carefully tracked their bloodlines over the centuries, and in a trait that is surprisingly extraterrestrial in nature, they pay close attention to genetics. The Italian mafia had many ties and a great deal of control over the Pope and the Vatican. And for this to be taken over by the New York Mafia would be quite a coup. Not only over the Rothschilds, who are deeply connected to the Vatican, but to the Italian families who have been running the Western countries for a very long time. If civil war is raging between 2 mafia groups, the New York and Rothschild groups, and the Italian families get involved, we may see some all-out gunfights, quote-unquote gunfights, in the form of financial destruction, war, the full implementation of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, attacks on big corporations like Tesla, secretly run by one side or the other, and internet or electrical grid disruptions designed to inhibit cryptos. Number 12. When ICE, I think that stands for Immigration Control, when ICE moved into LA to arrest 39 specific illegal immigrants, all hell broke loose. The Soros people were ready with their signs and flags and rock throwers. Protesters pretended that thousands of illegal immigrants were being scooped up and carted away. When I asked the question, what is needed to quiet the uproar in Los Angeles over removing illegal immigrants? I saw a map of the entire United States, but California was gone. The entire state was floating way offshore in the Pacific Ocean with a lot of smoke and ash rising from it. I had the impression of chaos, no man's land, a third world state, lost territory, secession. And I had the feeling that the U.S. was broken. And in tuning in to the people who were being removed, I picked up a number of thoughts that went something like this. If the governments can move us around at will, regardless of legal paperwork, why can't we move ourselves around at will? Government has just shown us that all that legal paperwork is irrelevant BS. There's no reason we can't live where we want. Wow. As I was watching this whole scene and feeling kind of sad about what was happening, the entire map moved. And I saw Tennessee and North Carolina with the same kind of smoke and ash rising from them. I wondered if they too had a simmering attitude of being done with our government and done with being part of the U.S. Number 13. The big golden arches of the McDonald's Corporation were broken off and lying on the ground. And I had the impression that McDonald's was struggling to stay alive. There was a lot of blame being directed toward the MAHA group, Make America Healthy Again. But I think that was misdirected. I think the real message to McDonald's is you cannot feed people fake food and expect them to survive or thrive. Once they're gone, who will be your customers? I followed this whole scene forward into a much longer future and saw that McDonald's struggle was matched by struggles in other fast food chains. And then I saw a number of big corporations just slowly shrinking or having great difficulty. And I even saw some of those specific companies. They were Best Buy, Federal Express, car companies, big department stores, and even gas stations. The only things that were holding steady were hardware stores and grocery stores. It's not very much, excitement or drama around those. By this time, I was 5 to 7 years out into the future, and I was thinking that things did not look very promising for business. However, as I was looking at that, a second set of scenes appeared, and although there were almost no fast food chains, a couple of them had completely changed what they offered. Completely. And I had the impression I was looking at a completely different timeline. Number 14. I saw this last month, and I hesitate to add to any worries about what's happening. But I continue to see earthquakes and some type of water event, which I think is a tsunami. In fact, I saw 2 tsunamis. One was in the Mediterranean and the other was in the northern Pacific Ocean. Earthquakes and small tsunamis happen kind of regularly in the South Pacific, and it seems like the people there are more used to such events and more prepared. But people in the northern part of the Pacific are not only much more numerous, they're more vulnerable because they are less prepared. We are getting to a point where every household needs to have an emergency bag packed and ready to go at a moment's notice. Number 15. I saw a big disruption at a big graduation ceremony. It was as if protesters stormed the ceremony and disrupted everything. And I thought it was happening in the eastern half of the US. So hope that doesn't happen. Number 16. While wondering how things were going in the Middle East, I had a sudden vision of the Red Sea. A ship that I thought was an Israeli ship was moving along, but was under attack by a couple of smaller ships that were much more effective than you would think, given their small size. I had the impression that this was part of a continuing string of incidents and that a ceasefire was being broken. I have not really paid a lot of attention to what's happening in the Red Sea area, but I ended up with a question, which was, is Yemen an Iranian proxy taking pot shots at Israel on behalf of Iran? I think we'll have to wait and see. Number 17. We have arrived, we here in the US, have arrived at a point where our government will be unable to accomplish anything as we move forward. The big, beautiful bill did not look like it was going to pass due to the lack of votes from people who still believe we can balance the budget, reduce debt, and fix the country. The odd thing in this vision is that it looked like the big, beautiful bill was meant to destroy the Federal Reserve. And by not passing the bill, the Fed remains in place and the country slowly disintegrates. A hard thing to see. Number 18, Trump's popularity will fade. He has reached the Peter principle in his life, which means he has risen to a point that is as far as he can go, because to rise any further, he would require additional capacities that he just doesn't have. Number 19, the US government in Washington, D.C. continues to be ineffective, and a very quiet revolt takes place in which many people outside D.C. stop believing that the U.S. can be great again. They stop participating. They stop paying taxes. They stop paying attention. They stop supporting the government at all. As mentioned above, the disintegration is slow but steady. The hard part in looking at this is that it is not too late to save the country. But without people believing and supporting that effort, it just doesn't happen. Number 20, Europe and Russia fight. I actually saw what I thought was a bomb going off. And after the fight, they then dance around one another like they're like two roosters posturing, back and forth. And then they come together. It's like, what? Okay. So that's Europe and Russia. And then the last one, number 21, England fractures politically, financially, and culturally over the coming year. So that's it for this look-see. And for those who are watching or listening for the first time, the look-see is a brief look at what's happening in our world and where the big trends are headed. Reality is not fixed. It's dynamic, and it changes according to what we are doing with our consciousness. Nothing becomes real until we make it real. We make a choice, we take some kind of action, we put something together or take it apart. Those decisive actions are what determine the path and the outcome. Of course, once we set something in motion, it takes a lot to make a change or get things going in another direction. And that's exactly the reason for looking ahead. If we don't like the direction that things are going, we can make appropriate changes in a timely way or prepare for what may look inevitable. If we see something we like, we can put some conscious attention on that outcome and help things along. It is important to look ahead and assess what is happening and where we are going so that we know whether or not we need to do something different. So thank you so much for listening. Keep your eyes open and your wits about you, and we'll see you in July. Make a good month. Take care.